The fateful crash landing. The silence of space was not truly silent to Jake Harlow. It was a hum, an ever-present whisper of the universe itself. He had grown used to it during his long months aboard the Odyssey, his deep space exploration vessel. But now that familiar hum was punctuated by something far more ominous. Alarms blared, the lights flickered. The ship shuddered violently as it tumbled through the void, caught in the gravitational pull of an unknown planet. Systems failing. Critical damage detected. The ship's AI droned with cold indifference. Jake gritted his teeth, his hands flying over the control panel in front of him, trying to regain control of the descent. The stars outside the viewport blurred as the ship spun. His breath came in sharp bursts, sweat dripping from his brow. But his mind remained laser-focused. He'd survived worse. He had to survive this. "Come on," he muttered under his breath, wrestling with the ship's controls. "Not today, not like this." The planet below loomed larger with each passing second. Its surface was a patchwork of pink and purple hues, the atmosphere glowing with an ethereal light. It should have been beautiful, but all Jake could see was his potential grave. With a sudden, ear-splitting screech, the ship broke through the planet's atmosphere. The temperature in the cabin spiked, warning lights flashing as flames licked the hull. Jake's body was slammed back into his seat by the sheer force of re-entry, his vision narrowing as the G-forces pressed down on him. He was barely conscious when the ship hit the surface with a bone-rattling crash. For several long moments, there was nothing but darkness. Jake felt weightless, floating in a liminal space between life and death. Then, slowly, painfully, the world came back into focus. His body ached, his muscles screaming in protest as he moved. The acrid smell of smoke filled the cabin, and somewhere in the distance, a faint, steady beep indicated that some part of the ship was still operational. "Barely. Odyssey, report," Jake croaked, his voice hoarse. "Main systems offline. Structural integrity at 12%. Oxygen levels stable, for now," the AI responded, as emotionless as ever. Jake groaned, unbuckling himself from the pilot's seat and stumbling forward. His legs were shaky, his head pounding. The ship's hull had been breached in several places, jagged cracks running along the walls like spiderwebs. He didn't have much time before the atmosphere outside would start to leak in, or before the ship completely collapsed. He grabbed a survival pack from the emergency locker, slinging it over his shoulder. Inside were the essentials: food rations, a water purifier, a multi-tool, and his plasma cutter. Small comforts on an alien world, but better than nothing. The airlock hissed open, revealing the world beyond. Jake stepped out into an alien landscape, the likes of which he had never seen before. The sky was a swirling mass of purple and deep blue, illuminated by a distant twin sun system. The ground beneath his feet was soft, covered in a strange pinkish moss that stretched out as far as he could see. Towering crystalline structures dotted the horizon, shimmering in the light like enormous, fragile sculptures. The air was warm, almost humid, and carried a faint, sweet scent that was both unfamiliar and oddly pleasant. For a moment, Jake stood there, simply absorbing the strange beauty of the planet he had crash-landed on. He had seen countless worlds before, but none had looked quite like this. This place was alive in a way that was hard to describe, everything seeming to pulse with a quiet, harmonious energy, as if the very ground beneath his feet was aware of his presence. "Where the hell am I?" Jake muttered to himself, pulling out his portable scanner. The device hummed to life, flashing a series of symbols across its screen. No known data on the atmosphere or life forms, no established contact with any interplanetary maps. It was official. He was on an uncharted world, completely cut off from Earth or any other human colony. Just as he was beginning to formulate a plan, salvage what he could from the wreck, find shelter, hopefully repair his distress beacon, Jake noticed something odd. The pink moss that covered the ground seemed to be moving. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, it rippled outward like a wave traveling across the surface of a pond. He stepped back, eyes widening, and then he saw them. They emerged from the moss like ghosts, their slender forms almost blending into the landscape at first. There were just a few, but then more appeared, surrounding him in a wide circle. They were tall, at least a foot taller than him, with graceful, elongated limbs and pink-tinted skin that shimmered in the light. Their eyes were large and luminous, their faces framed by delicate, gossamer-like hair that seemed to flow in the air around them. They wore form-fitting, iridescent garments that looked almost liquid in their design, as if the fabric itself was alive. Jake's hand instinctively moved to his plasma cutter, but he didn't draw it. These creatures, these aliens, weren't attacking him. In fact, they weren't moving at all. They simply stood there, watching him with an intensity that made his skin crawl. He had the distinct feeling that he was being judged, evaluated. "Okay," Jake said aloud, raising his hands slowly. "I come in peace, not looking for trouble." The aliens remained silent, their faces unreadable. One of them, a figure slightly smaller than the others, stepped forward. Jake noticed a subtle difference in this one. Her hair was longer, almost silver in hue, and her eyes seemed to glow brighter. There was an air of authority about her, though she was not aggressive. She simply studied him, her gaze flickering over his body, taking in every detail. Jake swallowed, feeling the weight of the moment. He was the first human to ever make contact with these beings. Every move he made, every word he spoke, would define the future of human-alien relations. Assuming they understood him, of course. Human. A voice echoed in his mind, clear and melodic. It wasn't coming from the figure's mouth, but rather from within his own head. Jake's eyes widened. Telepathy. "You are not welcome here." The voice was not angry, but it carried a firm, cold finality. The alien regarded him with a mix of curiosity and disdain, as if she were looking at something beneath her. A wild animal, perhaps, or a primitive creature. "I didn't mean to crash here," Jake said, taking a careful step forward. "My ship. Something went wrong. I just need time to repair it, and I'll be out of your hair." He stopped, realizing that these beings probably didn't even have hair like humans did. "I mean, I'll leave as soon as I can." The figure tilted her head, her expression still unreadable. Behind her, the others remained perfectly still, like statues. Jake could feel their collective focus bearing down on him, making the air around him feel heavy. "You will come with us," the voice said, though there was no sense of invitation. It was a command, plain and simple. Jake's mind raced. He had no idea what they planned to do with him. Interrogate him, imprison him, worse. But he didn't exactly have much of a choice. If these aliens were the dominant species on this planet, they were his best chance at survival, even if they didn't seem particularly thrilled by his presence. With a deep breath, Jake nodded. "All right, lead the way." The figure turned, and without a word, the others followed. Jake trailed behind, his heart pounding in his chest. He glanced back at his wrecked ship, now just a smoldering heap on the alien landscape. The thought crossed his mind that he might never see it again, might never return to the world he called home. As they walked, the landscape shifted. The pink moss gave way to smoother, rockier terrain, and in the distance, Jake saw the crystalline structures he had noticed earlier towering even higher than he had first imagined. They were unlike anything he had seen on Earth, gleaming in the soft light of the twin suns, their surfaces refracting the colors of the sky in a mesmerizing display. The aliens moved with such grace, it was almost as if they were gliding, their slender forms cutting through the air without disturbing the world around them. They arrived at the outskirts of a massive city, a place of breathtaking beauty and advanced design. Buildings spiraled upward like organic extensions of the Earth itself, made of materials that seemed to glow with a soft inner light. The air here was thick with energy, a hum that resonated deep within Jake's bones. In the center of the city stood an imposing structure, a palace-like tower that seemed to be made entirely of translucent crystal. The leader of the group, the one who had spoken in his mind, led him toward this central building without a word. As they approached, two guards, tall and imposing, with weapons Jake didn't recognize, stepped forward, but they made no move to stop him. Jake's mind whirled with 1,000 questions, but he forced himself to stay calm. He had no idea what awaited him in that crystalline palace, but one thing was certain. His life, and possibly the fate of humanity's first contact with this alien race, was about to change forever. First contact. Jake had been inside towering buildings before, monuments to human achievement, but nothing compared to the ethereal majesty of the crystalline palace that loomed before him. As he stepped through the entrance, it felt as though the walls themselves whispered. Light refracted off every surface, casting delicate rainbow patterns on the floor and ceiling. The architecture was simultaneously delicate and formidable, a perfect blend of nature and technology, as though the building had grown from the earth itself rather than being constructed. The air inside was cooler, more refined, and Jake immediately felt the weight of scrutiny upon him. His boots echoed loudly against the polished floor, a stark contrast to the near-silent movements of the alien beings surrounding him. Their grace was otherworldly. They seemed to glide rather than walk, their slender forms almost dissolving into the background of their environment. As they let him through the towering halls, Jake tried to maintain his composure, but his heart raced. This was a situation he had never trained for, first contact with an advanced alien race. He glanced at the lead alien, the one with the silver-tinged hair and the air of authority who had communicated with him telepathically. She had said little after commanding him to follow, and her expression remained unreadable. Jake wasn't sure if it was her calm exterior that unnerved him, or the fact that she had spoken directly into his mind without opening her mouth. He still wasn't entirely convinced that had even happened. But as they drew nearer to what appeared to be the center of the palace, Jake's stomach twisted with the realization that this, whatever this place was far more than just a city. It was an empire, and he was walking into its heart. Finally, the procession halted before a set of massive doors, so tall and ornate they seemed to touch the ceiling itself. They shimmered with the same iridescence as the rest of the palace, but were etched with intricate symbols and shapes that made Jake's head spin if he stared at them too long. The guards stationed there were unlike any of the others he'd seen, towering figures in sleek, metallic armor, their faces obscured by intricate masks. They crossed long spears in front of the doors as the alien leader stepped forward. Without a word, she raised her hand, and the doors parted with a soft hum, revealing the vast chamber beyond. Jake's breath caught in his throat. If the rest of the palace had been awe-inspiring, this room was something else entirely. The throne room was circular, its walls made of the same translucent material, but these shimmered with a soft, pulsing light that seemed to react to the presence of those inside. At the center of the room, elevated on a platform of polished stone, sat the throne. It was not what Jake expected, no elaborate seat or grandiose display of power. Instead, the throne appeared to be an extension of the floor, growing upward like a natural formation. And seated upon it was the queen. Queen Lyra was a vision of elegance and authority, her slender form clad in flowing robes of deep, shimmering violet that contrasted sharply with her pale pink skin. Her hair, a cascading river of silver that fell almost to her feet, framed a face that was both serene and striking. Her eyes, larger than a human's, glowed softly with the same iridescent hue as the rest of the palace, and they fixed on Jake the moment he entered the room. Around her, seated in a semicircle on lower platforms, were her advisors and court members, an array of figures that exuded power and wisdom, all watching Jake with thinly veiled curiosity and suspicion. He could feel the weight of their judgment before any words were spoken. The lead alien, the one who had guided him here, stepped forward and bowed deeply before the queen, speaking a language Jake couldn't understand. The sound was musical, fluid, each word blending seamlessly into the next like a song that had no beginning or end. Jake listened intently, trying to pick out any recognizable pattern or sound, but it was unlike anything he'd ever encountered. The Queen listened without interrupting, her gaze never leaving Jake. When the guide had finished, Queen Lyra spoke, her voice as soft as the breeze, yet it carried an undeniable authority. "You are the human who has crashed upon our world," she said, her voice clear in Jake's mind. Telepathy, again. It was still jarring, but he tried not to show his discomfort. "Yes," Jake replied, his voice sounding small in the vastness of the chamber. He straightened his posture, doing his best to appear confident and respectful. "My ship malfunctioned. I didn't mean to intrude, but I'm stranded here until I can repair it." There was a pause as the Queen regarded him with an unreadable expression. The silence stretched on, and Jake began to feel the weight of their collective gaze pressing down on him, as though they could see through him, into him. "We have long been aware of your kind," the Queen said, her voice echoing in his mind. "Humans have been known to us for centuries, though never have we allowed one to set foot upon our world. You are the first." Jake's stomach twisted. Her words carried a dark undertone, an implication that humans had been watched, perhaps even judged, long before this moment. And judging by the atmosphere in the room, the verdict wasn't favorable. "You speak as if humans are a threat," Jake ventured carefully. "But I'm not here to harm anyone. I'm just trying to survive." The Queen's gaze shifted slightly, and for a moment, something flickered across her face. Something like amusement, though it was gone as quickly as it came. "Survival is the most basic of instincts," she said, "and yet, it is often in the name of survival that the greatest atrocities are committed." There it was, the core of their distrust. Jake exhaled slowly. He had known this would be difficult, but the enormity of the task ahead of him was only now beginning to sink in. The Ethans didn't just view humans as different, they viewed them as dangerous. And they weren't entirely wrong. Humanity's history was littered with violence, war, and destruction. But that wasn't the whole story. "I understand why you think that," Jake said, his voice steady despite the pressure he felt. "Humans aren't perfect. We've made mistakes. But we've also created incredible things. We've explored, built civilizations, cured diseases, created art. We're not just defined by our worst actions." The Queen's expression remained unchanged, but Jake could feel a shift in the atmosphere. The court members around her exchanged glances, some intrigued, others skeptical. It was as if he had spoken a language they hadn't heard before, one that didn't fit into their preconceived notions of what humans were. A soft rustle behind him caught Jake's attention, and he turned slightly to see the figure who had led him into the palace, Zara. She had remained silent throughout the exchange, standing just behind him, a silver-tinged hair catching the light. She was watching him closely, her luminous eyes narrowed in thought. Jake couldn't quite read her expression, but something about the way she looked at him made him think she wasn't entirely in agreement with the rest of the court. Zara stepped forward, drawing the attention of the Queen and the advisors. "Your Majesty," she said aloud, her voice clear and strong, though Jake noticed a slight tremor of uncertainty beneath it. "Perhaps it would be wise to learn more of the human's intentions before we pass judgment. He has shown no aggression since his arrival. In fact, he has demonstrated knowledge that could be of value to us." The Queen turned her gaze to Zara, and for a long moment, the room was filled with a tense, charged silence. Zara's words hung in the air, a subtle challenge to the prevailing sentiment in the room. Jake could see the other advisors exchanging glances, some of them frowning at Zara's boldness. "You speak in defense of the human, Zara," the Queen said, her tone neutral but laced with a quiet power. "Do you believe he is different from the others of his kind?" Zara hesitated, her eyes flickering briefly to Jake before she answered. "I do not know, Your Majesty. But I believe there is more to him than we have yet seen. His actions do not align with the stories we have been told." Jake's heart skipped a beat. It was a small gesture, a simple statement, but it was the first time since his arrival that anyone, had given him the benefit of the doubt. The Queen regarded Zara for a long, thoughtful moment before nodding slowly. "Very well," she said. "The human will remain in our custody for now. Zara, You will oversee his stay and determine whether he poses a threat, or if there is indeed more to him than we have been led to believe. Zara bowed her head in acknowledgement, though Jake didn't miss the brief flicker of surprise that crossed her face. "Thank you," Jake said, addressing the Queen, though his gratitude was as much directed toward Zara as it was toward the monarch. He had no idea what Zara's motivations were, whether she was truly interested in understanding him or if she simply saw this as a way to test a theory. Either way, he had been given a lifeline. The Queen rose from her throne, signaling the end of the audience. "Be warned, human," she said, her voice once again filling his mind. "This is not an act of mercy, but an opportunity. Prove yourself worthy of it." With that, the Queen swept from the room, her advisors following in a silent, graceful procession. Jake was left standing in the vast chamber, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He was alive for now, but this was only the beginning. He would have to navigate not just this alien world, but the complex web of politics, prejudice, and fear that defined the Ethan view of humanity. Zara approached him, her expression guarded but no longer hostile. "It seems we are to work together," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I hope, for your sake, that you are as different as you claim to be." Jake met her gaze, his heart still pounding in his chest, and nodded. "I guess we'll find out." Together, they walked out of the throne room and into the unknown. Part 3 will continue the story as Jake begins his time under Ethan's supervision, navigating their society and growing closer to Zara. Under Ethan's supervision, the day passed like whispers, delicate and fragile. Jake found himself navigating not only the alien landscape, but also the intricate and unfamiliar culture of the Ethans. He had expected danger at every turn, his mind braced for the moment when this elegant, peaceful-looking race would reveal a darker side. But the danger came in subtler forms: suspicion, prejudice, and an overwhelming sense of isolation. From the moment Jake was assigned to Zara, she had kept her distance, observing him with an unreadable expression. Their interactions were brief and formal, and though she never spoke ill of him, there was a quiet skepticism in her eyes, as if she were waiting for him to confirm everything she'd ever believed about humans. Jake had been given a small chamber within one of the lesser towers of the Ethan city, a place that was both beautiful and unsettling. The walls, made of the same crystalline substance as the palace, shimmered with soft light that pulsed rhythmically. It was a living structure, like much of the city, and while it was awe-inspiring, it made him feel as though he were being constantly watched. Every breath, every movement seemed to echo through the strange material, amplifying his sense of alienness. During the day, Zara escorted him through the city, showing him areas that most outsiders would never be permitted to see. They spoke little at first, though Jake made attempts at conversation, trying to find common ground. Her responses were always measured, carefully polite, but her guarded nature remained firmly in place. She was, after all, a diplomat and advisor to the Queen, and her role was to evaluate whether or not Jake posed a threat. On the third morning, they stood on a high balcony overlooking the sprawling city. The view was breathtaking, even to Jake, who had seen wonders in his travels. Below them, the city thrummed with life, its inhabitants going about their day with a quiet grace that seemed almost choreographed. In the distance, the great crystal spires of the palace reached up toward the violet sky, and beyond that, the alien wilderness stretched out, vast and unknown. Zara stood beside him, her posture as elegant and composed as always. The light from the twin suns filtered through her silver-tinged hair, casting faint glimmers around her head like a halo. She glanced at Jake, her expression thoughtful. "You have been quiet," she said, her voice soft but carrying an underlying edge. "I would have expected more questions." Jake sighed, leaning his elbows on the railing and staring out at the city below. "It's not that I don't have questions. I have more than I can count. But I get the feeling that if I ask them, you won't answer." Her lips twitched, almost imperceptibly. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was the closest Jake had come to seeing one. "You're observant," Zara said. "That is a good trait for survival. But I assure you, my reluctance to answer is not born of hostility. Then what is it born of? Jake asked, turning to face her fully now. You seem like you're walking on eggshells around me. I'm just a human, a stranded explorer trying to fix a ship. But you and your people, it's like you're waiting for me to explode or something. Why? Zora's eyes flickered with something. Was it guilt? It was hard to tell. She lowered her gaze for a moment, her hands clasping together as she thought. When she spoke, her voice was quieter, more vulnerable than before. We are a people of caution, Jake. Our history is long and full of complicated lessons. There are things about your kind that we have known for a long time, though we have never interacted with humans directly. We have heard stories, seen evidence from worlds that humans have touched. Evidence of what? Jake asked, his brow furrowing. He had a feeling he knew the answer, but he needed to hear it from her. Violence, Zora said, her voice barely above a whisper. Destruction. War. Your people have a history of conflict, of consuming what you do not understand. When we first learned of humans, we chose to remain distant. We saw no need to invite that conflict here, to our world. Jake's chest tightened, a familiar ache settling in. He had spent his entire life hearing about humanity's flaws, its darker impulses. As an explorer, he had seen both the best and worst of what human civilization could achieve. But to hear it spoken so plainly by another species, one so different, so refined, felt like a punch to the gut. I can't argue with that, Jake said, his voice heavy. We've done some terrible things, but we're not all like that. I'm not like that. I didn't come here to harm anyone. I came here because I had no choice. My ship. I know, Zara interrupted gently. I have seen how you have conducted yourself since your arrival. You have not acted in a manner consistent with the stories we've been told. There was a long pause. The wind shifted slightly, carrying the faint scent of the strange pink flora that grew in abundance around the city. Jake could feel Zara's eyes on him, not with the suspicion of before, but with a new kind of intensity, as though she was seeing him for the first time. You don't trust me, Jake said softly, and I understand why. But that doesn't mean you can't try. I want to learn about your people, Zara. I want to understand what makes this place so different, so beautiful. But if you keep me at arm's length, I'll never get the chance to show you that humans are more than the stories. Zara looked away, her gaze drifting over the city again. Her posture remained rigid, but Jake noticed her hands had unclasped, resting loosely at her sides. She seemed to be wrestling with something, an internal battle that played out in the flicker of her eyes and the tension in her shoulders. Finally, she spoke. Perhaps I have been too quick to judge, but there is much at stake, more than you know. Your presence here has already stirred tension in the Queen's court. Many believe you should be sent away, if not worse. Varric, one of the Queen's most trusted advisors, is among them. Varric, Jake repeated, recognizing the name. He had seen the alien during his audience with the Queen, tall, stern, and with a palpable disdain for Jake that had radiated from him like heat. He doesn't strike me as someone who will change his mind easily. He will not, Zara said. Varric is old-fashioned. He believes that anything not born of this world is a threat to it. He sees you as the embodiment of everything we fear. Jake's mind raced. Varric wasn't just a minor threat. He was a significant obstacle. If he had sway over the Queen, Jake's time here could be even shorter than he had thought. Is there anything I can do to convince him otherwise? Jake asked, though he knew the answer before Zara shook her head. No, Varric's mind is made up. But the Queen listens to all her advisors, not just him. She values my perspective as well. Zara trailed off, her voice faltering slightly, and Jake noticed the briefest flicker of uncertainty in her usually composed demeanor. That's why she assigned you to me, Jake finished for her. To see if I can be trusted. Zara nodded. Yes, but it's not just about trust, it's about understanding. You represent something new, something we have never encountered before. If I can prove to the Queen that there is more to your kind than the stories we have been told, then perhaps She hesitated, then met his gaze directly. Perhaps there is hope for a future where our people can coexist. Jake was struck by the weight of her words. This wasn't just about him surviving. This was about changing an entire planet's perception of his species. It was a responsibility he hadn't asked for, but now that it was laid at his feet, he couldn't walk away from it. I don't know how I'll do that, Jake admitted, but I'm willing to try. Zora's expression softened, just a fraction, but enough for Jake to notice. I believe you, she said quietly, and that is why I will help you. Jake blinked, taken aback. It was the first time Zora had spoken openly about wanting to help him. Up until now, it had seemed like she was merely tolerating his presence out of duty. But now, there was something different in her tone, a sincerity that made his pulse quicken. Thank you, Jake said, his voice sincere. I didn't expect that. Zora tilted her head slightly, her eyes searching his face as though trying to decipher some unspoken truth. I did not expect it either, she admitted. But you are different from what I imagined, and in time, perhaps the others will see that too. There was a moment of silence between them, one that was not uncomfortable, but rather filled with the weight of shared understanding. For the first time since his arrival, Jake felt that he wasn't entirely alone. Zora's skepticism had not disappeared, but there was a bridge between them now. Fragile, yes, but real. It was a start. As they continued to stand on the balcony, Zora broke the silence. Come, she said, turning toward the entrance. There is something I wish to show you. Jake followed her, curious. They descended from the balcony into the heart of the city, moving through the narrow, winding streets that twisted like veins through the crystalline structures. Zora led him into an area that seemed quieter than the bustling center, an area where the buildings were smaller, more intimate. This is where our engineers and scientists work, Zora explained as they passed through a wide archway. It is the foundation of much of what we have built. Jake's interest piqued. Can I see it? Zora hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Yes, but there is something specific I wish to show you. They entered a large, circular building, its walls lined with strange machines and devices that Jake couldn't begin to understand. It reminded him of Earth's laboratories, but everything here was so much more organic, the technology seeming to flow with the architecture as if the machines were alive, growing out of the walls and floors. At the center of the room stood a massive device, a shimmering crystalline structure that pulsed with light. Several Ethan scientists were gathered around it, their attention focused on its intricate workings. This is our energy source, Zora said, her voice hushed with reverence. It powers the entire city. We harness the natural energies of our planet through this device. Jake stared at it, fascinated. It's beautiful. Zora smiled, a small, genuine smile that caught Jake off guard. It is, but recently there has been an issue. The device has been malfunctioning, and our engineers have not been able to determine why. Jake frowned. Malfunctioning how? There are fluctuations in the energy output, Zora explained. Sometimes the device surges, producing more energy than it should. Other times it weakens, and we lose power. It is a dangerous imbalance. Jake studied the device more closely, his mind working through possibilities. Have you checked the energy regulators? If there's a surge, it could mean there's a blockage or a misalignment in the system that's causing an uneven distribution. Zora blinked, surprised by his quick analysis. I do not know. Our engineers have not mentioned such a possibility. Jake moved toward the device, but stopped short of touching it. I don't want to overstep, but I've seen similar issues in human energy systems. I might be able to help. Zora looked at him, her expression thoughtful. She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Very well. If you think you can assist, I will allow it. Jake took a deep breath, stepping closer to the shimmering structure. He could feel the energy radiating from it, a soft hum that vibrated through the air. It was alien technology, to be sure, but the fundamentals were there: power regulation, distribution. He began to study the device, his eyes tracing the lines of energy conduits and crystal formations. As he worked, Zara watched him closely, her skepticism slowly giving way to something else, something closer to admiration. She had expected him to fail, to flounder in the face of their advanced technology. But instead, Jake moved with confidence and precision, his mind focused on the task at hand. After several minutes of careful examination, Jake straightened up. "I think I found the problem," he said, turning to Zara. "There's a misalignment in one of the energy conduits. It's causing a buildup that's leading to the surges. If we realign it, the system should stabilize." Zara stared at him, her eyes wide with surprise. You can fix it." Jake nodded. "I'm pretty sure I can. I'll need a few tools, but it's not as complicated as it looks." For the first time, Zara's guarded expression fell away completely, replaced by something Jake hadn't expected: hope. "Do it," she said, her voice firm. Jake smiled, feeling a surge of confidence. He turned back to the device, ready to begin the delicate work of repairing the system. As he did, he couldn't help but feel that this moment, this opportunity to prove himself, was the turning point he had been waiting for. And Zara, watching him with a new light in her eyes, seemed to realize it too. As Jake worked, the two of them exchanged glances, and in those brief moments of connection, they both began to understand that their fates were becoming intertwined in ways neither had anticipated. Part 4 will continue the story as Jake's success with the energy device shifts the dynamic between him and the Ethans, even as new threats emerge. And Zara, watching him with a new light in her eyes, seemed to realize it too. As Jake worked, the two of them exchanged glances, and in those brief moments of connection, they both began to understand that their fates were becoming intertwined in ways neither had anticipated. A hidden threat. The repaired energy system hummed steadily, its once erratic pulses now smooth and consistent. The crystalline device at the heart of the Ethan city glowed with a renewed, steady light, bathing the room in a serene, otherworldly glow. Jake wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead, stepping back to admire the work. He had managed to fix the issue and in doing so had proved to the Ethans, and more importantly, to Zara, that he was more than the brutish invader they had feared. But as Jake looked around at the gathered engineers, he could sense a shift. While some regarded him with curiosity, others still bore expressions of wariness. He had solved one problem, but it was clear that repairing a piece of their technology wouldn't be enough to fully change the deeply ingrained beliefs that many Ethans held about humans. Zara stood at his side, her luminous eyes watching the device as it continued its flawless operation. There was an unmistakable glint of pride in her gaze, a silent acknowledgement of Jake's capabilities. Their relationship had evolved in the past days, the distance that had once separated them now bridged by mutual respect and understanding. But that connection was fragile, and they both knew it. "Thank you," Zara said, her voice low but sincere as the engineers began to disperse, murmuring amongst themselves about the success of the repairs. Jake gave her a small smile, feeling a warmth he hadn't expected. "I'm just glad I could help. It felt good to do something useful." He glanced at her, his expression growing more serious. "But I know this doesn't change everything. Varric still wants me gone, doesn't he?" Zara's expression tightened at the mention of Varric. She had told Jake more about the powerful advisor of the past few days, his rigid, uncompromising view of the world, his deep distrust of anything and anyone outside the Ethan realm. Varric's influence in the Queen's court was significant, and his opposition to Jake's presence had been unwavering. "Yes," Zara admitted, folding her arms as they began to walk toward the balcony overlooking the city. "He is not easily swayed, even with the success of your repairs. He believes you are a threat. He sees your knowledge of our technology as proof that humans are dangerous, capable of adapting too quickly to things that should be beyond their reach." Jake frowned. "I'm not here to steal your secrets or harm your people. I just want to survive." "I know that," Zara interrupted, her voice softening as they stopped at the edge of the balcony. The twin suns were beginning to set, casting the city in a soft pink and violet glow. I've seen enough of you to believe that. But Varric, he's different. To him, you represent everything he fears. A disruption to the order he spent his life protecting. Jake leaned on the rail, gazing out at the alien city below. It's not just about me, is it? He asked, his voice thoughtful. There's more going on here. Something bigger than just one human crash landing on your planet. Zara hesitated, her eyes distant as she stared into the horizon. For a long moment, she said nothing, but Jake could feel the weight of her thoughts pressing against the silence between them. You're right, she finally said, her voice low, almost a whisper. There's more. Our society has always been rigid. For centuries, we've lived in isolation, believing that we were superior to the rest of the galaxy, that our way of life was the only way. But recently, there have been whispers, rumors that not everyone agrees with that view. Some believe it's time for change, for us to open ourselves to the possibility that we're not as alone, or as different as we think. She glanced at Jake, her expression conflicted. But those are dangerous ideas. Varric and others like him see them as a threat to everything we've built. And your arrival has only intensified that fear. You are a symbol of what could happen if we let our guard down. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. It wasn't just his presence that was causing tension. It was what he represented. His arrival had ignited a spark in a long simmering conflict within Athens society, one that had been waiting for a catalyst. What about you? Jake asked quietly, turning to face her fully. Where do you stand in all of this? Zora's eyes met his, and for a brief moment, she let her guard down completely. Her expression was vulnerable, raw with the weight of her responsibilities. I don't know, she admitted, her voice barely audible. I've always believed in our ways, in the idea that we are a people of peace and balance. But after meeting you, seeing what you're capable of, I'm starting to wonder if we've been wrong. Perhaps there is more to the galaxy than we've allowed ourselves to see. Jake reached out, gently touching her arm. You're not wrong to question things, Zara. Sometimes change is the only way forward. She looked at him, her gaze softening with a mixture of admiration and uncertainty. But change comes at a price, she said quietly, her voice tinged with sorrow. And I fear that price may be higher than either of us is prepared to pay. Before Jake could respond, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed behind them. They both turned to see one of the Queen's messengers approaching, a look of urgency on his face. He bowed quickly to Zara, then glanced warily at Jake before speaking. Advisor Zara, you are summoned to the Queen's chamber immediately. There is news. Zara's posture straightened, her expression becoming unreadable once more. What news? The messenger hesitated, casting another glance at Jake. It concerns Varric. He has taken action. Zara's eyes widened with alarm, and without another word, she motioned for Jake to follow her as they rushed through the corridors of the palace, the atmosphere tense and electric with unspoken danger. The Queen's chamber was filled with a heavy silence when Zara and Jake arrived. Queen Lyra sat on her crystalline throne, her face impassive but her eyes sharp, scanning the room with a keen awareness of the tension building around her. Arrayed before her were several advisors, including Varric, who stood tall and rigid, his expression a mask of cold certainty. His eyes, however, were fixed on Jake, burning with barely concealed disdain. Jake felt the weight of that gaze, but kept his expression neutral, though his heart raced. Something had shifted. He could feel it in the air. Your Majesty, Zara began, bowing deeply as she stepped forward. I have heard that there is urgent news. May I ask what has transpired? The Queen's gaze flickered briefly to Jake before settling on Zara. Varric has brought forth new concerns regarding our guest, she said, her voice calm but carrying a subtle undercurrent of tension. He believes that the presence of the human is a danger to the stability of our people. Jake felt his stomach drop. He had known this was coming, but hearing it confirmed in the Queen's measured tones made it all the more real. What danger do you speak of, Varric? Zara asked, her voice controlled but laced with an edge of challenge. Varric stepped forward, his posture stiff with righteousness. The human has already demonstrated his ability to manipulate our technology, he said, his voice low and resonant. He has shown knowledge beyond what we anticipated, and I believe he could use that knowledge to disrupt our systems, to turn our own creations against us. That's not true, Jake interjected, unable to stay silent any longer. I only repaired your energy system because it was malfunctioning. I'm not here to harm anyone. Varric's gaze snapped to Jake, his eyes narrowing with disdain. Your kind has a history of violence, of using technology for conquest. How long before you decide that our resources, our knowledge, are yours to take? How long before you bring your people here to claim what is not yours? Jake opened his mouth to respond, but Zara spoke first, her voice strong and clear. Varric, you accuse without evidence, she said, stepping between Jake and the other advisor. The human has done nothing but help us since his arrival. He repaired our energy system when our own engineers were struggling with it. He has shown no signs of aggression or ill intent. Varric's eyes flickered with annoyance, but he didn't back down. You are too trusting, Zara. You see what you want to see, not the reality of the situation. This human is dangerous, and the longer he remains, the greater the risk to our people. Zara's jaw tightened, but she held her ground. I have spent time with him, Varric. I have seen his actions firsthand. He is not the threat you make him out to be. Queen Lyra, who had been silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. Inoshi said, raising a hand. I have heard both sides and understand the concerns that have been raised. But this matter is not so simple. She turned to Jake, her gaze piercing. The human has proven himself capable of assisting us, yet his presence does stir unease among our people. We must find a way forward that considers both perspectives. Varric's eyes gleamed with a dangerous intensity. Then I propose a solution, Your Majesty. The human must be confined, his access to our systems restricted, until we can be certain that he poses no threat. He should remain under constant supervision. Jake felt a surge of anger rise within him, but he forced it down, knowing that any outburst would only confirm Varric's accusations. He turned to Zara, hoping for some sign of support. Zara looked at the Queen, her expression tight with frustration. Your Majesty, confining the human without cause would only deepen the divide between us. He has done nothing wrong. Punishing him for crimes he has not committed will only sow further distrust. Queen Lyra considered Zara's words carefully, her eyes distant as she weighed the options before her. The room was thick with tension, the air almost buzzing with the unspoken conflict that simmered beneath the surface. Finally, the Queen spoke, her voice measured and deliberate. Varric, I understand your concerns, but I will not imprison the human without just cause. However, I agree that his movements must be monitored closely for the sake of our people's security. He will remain under Zara's supervision, and any further access to our technology must be approved by the Council. Jake exhaled, relief washing over him. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than the alternative. He still had a chance to prove himself, to show the Ethans that he wasn't a threat. Varric, however, did not share his relief. His expression darkened, and Jake could sense the storm brewing behind his cold eyes. The battle was far from over. As you wish, Your Majesty, Varric said, his voice tight with barely contained frustration. He turned on his heel and left the chamber without another word, his movements stiff with anger. Zara glanced at Jake, her expression one of quiet support. We will find a way through this, she said softly, her voice steady despite the tension that hung in the air. Jake nodded, grateful for her presence, but the weight of the situation still pressed heavily on his shoulders. The Queen's decision had bought him some time, but Varric's influence was strong, and his opposition wasn't going to disappear. As they left the chamber, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that the ground beneath him was shifting, that something darker was looming just beyond the horizon. He had stepped into a world of politics and power struggles that went far deeper than he had realized, and he knew that his fight for survival had only just begun. But as he glanced at Zara walking beside him, her shoulders squared and her expression resolute, He felt a glimmer of hope. He wasn't alone in this. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Part 5, the final part of the story, will continue as Jake and Zara navigate the aftermath of the confrontation with Varric, their relationship deepening even as the risks grow higher. United we stand. The city was quiet, but the tension in the air felt like the calm before a storm. Jake had been awake for hours, pacing the length of his chamber, the subtle shimmer of the crystalline walls reflecting his restless movements. The soft glow of the alien architecture contrasted sharply with the turmoil brewing inside him. Varric's looming presence weighed heavily on his mind. He could feel the advisor's influence tightening around him like an invisible noose, and despite the Queen's decision to keep him under Zara's supervision, Jake knew Varric wouldn't stop until he was gone, or worse. The encounter in the Queen's court had been a temporary reprieve, but Jake could sense the growing divide within the Ethan society. Whispers had begun to circulate, rumors of discontent, of factions forming within the Queen's court. His arrival had stirred the waters of an already fragile equilibrium, and now the waves of change were crashing against the shores of this peaceful world. Varric represented one side, the side that wanted to maintain the status quo, to keep the Ethans isolated and secure, while others, perhaps led quietly by Zara, were beginning to see the need for something different. Jake sighed, running a hand through his disheveled hair. Every instinct told him that he should leave, repair his ship, get off this planet, and never look back. But the thought of leaving Zara, of abandoning the fragile bond they had built, felt wrong. Over the past weeks, she had become more than just a liaison between him and the Ethans. She had become a friend, someone who challenged him, intrigued him, and made him question everything he thought he knew about this world and about himself. As if summoned by his thoughts, there was a soft chime at the door. Jake's heart skipped a beat, and he crossed the room quickly, opening the door to find Zara standing there. The soft light of the hallway glinted off her silver-tinged hair, casting delicate shadows across her face. Her eyes, usually calm and composed, were clouded with something deeper tonight, worry, or perhaps a decision she had finally made. "Zara," Jake said, stepping aside to let her in. "What's going on? Is everything okay?" She entered the room quietly, her movements graceful but hurried, as if she had something important to share but didn't know where to begin. Again, her hands clasped in front of her, a sign of the internal conflict she often hid so well. "There is something you need to know," Zara said, her voice low but urgent. "Varric has not stopped his efforts to have you removed from the city. He's been rallying more support from the council, trying to convince them that you are a threat." Jake nodded grimly. "I figured as much. The guy doesn't seem like the type to back down easily." Zara shook her head, her expression troubled. "It's worse than that, Jake. He's not just trying to get the council to remove you. He's planning something more drastic. There are whispers that he intends to act outside the Queen's authority. I fear that he will attempt to take matters into his own hands." Jake felt a cold weight settle in his chest. "You mean he's going to try to have me killed?" Zara's silence was all the confirmation he needed. Jake clenched his fists, his mind racing. He had known that Varric hated him, but to go so far as to plot his assassination, that was something he hadn't fully prepared for. And yet, he wasn't surprised. Varric represented a rigid order, one that couldn't tolerate even the idea of change. Jake's very presence was a threat to that. "I have to leave," Jake said after a long pause, his voice tight with frustration. "If I stay here, I'm just making things worse for you, for everyone. I can't let Varric start a war because of me." "No," Zara said firmly, stepping closer to him. "You can't leave. Not like this." Jake blinked, taken aback by the intensity in her voice. "Zara, if I stay, Varric will." "I won't let him," Zara interrupted, her eyes blazing with a determination Jake had never seen before. "I won't let him hurt you." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The room was filled with the soft hum of the living walls, the city's subtle energy pulsing around them. But all Jake could focus on was the fierce expression on Zara's face. She meant every word. "I've spoken to the Queen," Zara continued, her voice softer now, but no less resolute. "She trusts my judgment. But Varric's influence runs deep. If we are to stop him, we need more than just the Queen's word. We need to show the people that there is another way." Jake frowned, unsure of what she meant. "What are you saying?" Zara took a deep breath, stepping even closer until there was barely any distance between them. Her eyes softened as she looked up at him, and for the first time, Jake saw the depth of emotion she had been holding back. "I'm saying that you've already proven yourself to me," she said quietly. "You've shown me that humans are not what we were taught to believe. But the others, they need to see it too. They need to see that you are not just a symbol of change, but a symbol of hope. That you are someone worth fighting for." Jake's heart thundered in his chest as her words sank in. He hadn't expected this, not the intensity of her belief in him, nor the closeness they now shared. Over the past weeks, he had grown to admire her strength, her intelligence, and her compassion. But he had tried to keep his feelings at bay, knowing that his time here was temporary. Now, standing here with her, the distance between them erased, he realized that it wasn't just admiration he felt. It was something deeper, something that scared him as much as it thrilled him. "Zara," Jake said, his voice rough with emotion, "I don't know how to thank you. But this is dangerous. If you stand with me, Varric will come after you too. I don't want to put you in danger." Zara smiled, a small, sad smile that made Jake's heart ache. "You don't understand, Jake. I've been in danger since the moment I started questioning our way of life. Varric and those like him, they'll always see me as a threat because I don't fall in line with their beliefs. But I'm not afraid of him. I'm afraid of losing the chance to make things better." Jake felt the world tilt beneath him. Zara wasn't just talking about Varric or the Council. She was talking about them, about the connection that had grown between them, the bond that had quietly taken root amidst the chaos of first contact and political intrigue. Before Jake could respond, Zara reached out, her hand brushing against his arm. The touch was light, but sent a jolt of electricity through him. He looked down at her hand, then back into her eyes, and saw the vulnerability she had been hiding for so long. I can't pretend that I haven't felt something," Zara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Something between us. I've tried to ignore it, to focus on my duty, but I can't anymore." Jake's breath caught in his throat. He had felt it too, but he hadn't dared to hope that Zara shared the same feelings. Now, standing here with her, the truth hanging between them, he realized how much he had been holding back. "I felt it too," Jake admitted, his voice rough. "But I didn't want to make things harder for you. I didn't want to." Zara shook her head, stepping closer until they were inches apart. "You're not making things harder, Jake. You're making things clearer." For a moment, the world outside seemed to fade away. The tension, the danger, Varric's looming threat, it all dissolved as Jake and Zara stood together, the air between them crackling with unspoken emotion. Jake's hand moved almost of its own accord, reaching up to brush a strand of silver-tinged hair away from Zara's face. Her skin was warm beneath his fingertips, and the softness of the gesture felt both intimate and electric. Zara's eyes fluttered closed for a brief second, and when she opened them again, there was no more hesitation, no more fear. She stepped forward, closing the distance between them, and Jake felt her breath warm against his lips. "Zara," he whispered, but before he could say anything more, she pressed her lips to his. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, as if both of them were still unsure if this was real. But then the floodgates opened, and the quiet tenderness gave way to something deeper, something that had been building for days, weeks. Jake wrapped his arms around her, drawing her closer, and Zara melted into him, her body fitting against his as if they had been made for each other. In that moment, the world outside didn't matter. There was no Varric, no council, no political tension. There was only them, two souls from different worlds, bound together by something far stronger than fear or doubt. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Zara rested her forehead against Jake's chest, her hands still gripping his arms. "We're in this together now," she whispered, her voice steady despite the emotions swirling between them. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." Jake tightened his hold on her, feeling the weight of her words settle deep in his chest. He knew she was right. Whatever happened next, whatever Varric had planned, they would face it as one. "I'm not going anywhere," Jake promised, his voice firm. "Not without you." The next day dawned with a sense of urgency. News of Varric's plans had begun to spread, and Jake could feel the growing unrest in the city. Zara had left early to meet with the Queen, hoping to gain her support in standing against Varric's more extreme measures, while Jake prepared for what was sure to be a confrontation. The crystalline city shimmered beneath the rising twin suns, but there was an undercurrent of tension in the streets. The usual calm grace of the Ethans seemed to have been replaced with something more wary, more uncertain. People whispered in groups, casting glances at Jake as he made his way toward the palace. As he entered the grand hall where the Queen's court convened, Jake felt the weight of every eye in the room turn to him. The court was already assembled, with Queen Lyra seated on her translucent throne, her expression serene, but her eyes sharp with awareness. Zara stood near the Queen, her posture straight and unwavering, though Jake could see the tension in her shoulders, and standing at the opposite end of the room was Varric, his presence as imposing and cold as ever. "Human," Varric said, his voice carrying a quiet menace as Jake entered. "You've caused quite the disturbance since your arrival." Jake stood his ground, meeting Varric's gaze with steady defiance. "I didn't ask to crash here, but I'm not going to apologize for trying to survive." Varric's lips curled into a sneer. "Survival is one thing, but you've gone beyond that. You've interfered with our systems, inserted yourself into our society, and now you've corrupted one of our most trusted advisors." At this, Zara stiffened, her eyes flashing with anger. "I am not corrupted, Varric," she said, her voice sharp. "I've chosen to see the truth. Jake is not a threat to us. You are." Varric's gaze shifted to Zara, his expression darkening with fury. "You've allowed yourself to be blinded by sentiment, Zara. You've forgotten your duty to our people." "No," Zara said firmly, stepping forward. "It is you who has forgotten your duty. Our people deserve more than isolation and fear. They deserve hope, a chance to grow, to connect with the rest of the galaxy. Jake represents that chance, and I will not let you destroy it." The room fell into a heavy silence, the tension palpable. All eyes were on the Queen now, waiting for her to speak. Queen Lyra's gaze moved between Jake, Zara, and Varric, her expression thoughtful. After what felt like an eternity, she rose from her throne, her presence commanding the attention of everyone in the room. "We stand at a crossroads," the Queen said, her voice calm but carrying the weight of her authority. "The arrival of this human has brought to light many questions we have long avoided, questions about our place in the galaxy, about our future as a people. Varric speaks of danger, of threats to our way of life, but Zara speaks of hope, of possibility. Both perspectives have merit." She paused, her eyes settling on Jake. "The human has proven himself to be capable, resourceful, and most importantly, willing to work with us, not against us. He has shown restraint where others might have chosen violence, and for that I commend him." Jake felt a surge of relief, though he knew the Queen's decision wasn't final yet. However, Queen Lyra continued, her voice growing firmer. "I cannot ignore the unrest his presence has caused. We are a people of peace, but that peace is fragile. If we are to move forward, we must do so together, united in our purpose." Her gaze shifted to Varric. "Varric, your concerns are valid, but your methods are not. We will not allow fear to dictate our actions. There will be no violence against the human, no attempts to remove him by force." Varric's face twisted with fury, but he remained silent, his jaw clenched. The Queen turned to Zara, her expression softening. "Zara, you have shown great courage in standing up for what you believe in. Your loyalty to our people is unquestionable, and your willingness to embrace new possibilities is admirable." Zara bowed her head in acknowledgement, but Jake could see the relief in her eyes. The human will remain under Zara's supervision, the Queen concluded, and any further actions involving him will be carefully considered by this council. We will not act out of fear, but out of wisdom and hope for a better future. The room remained silent as the Queen's words sank in. Varric, his face a mask of cold fury, turned sharply and left the chamber without a word. The tension in the room eased, but Jake knew that Varric's departure wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of a larger struggle, a battle for the soul of the Ethan people and for the future of their relationship with the rest of the galaxy. Zara stepped closer to Jake, her presence grounding him in the midst of the chaos. "It's not over," she said quietly, her voice laced with both determination and wariness. "Varric won't give up." "But for now, we've won," Jake nodded, his heart still pounding from the confrontation. They stood there for a moment, side by side, watching as the court slowly dispersed. The Queen remained on her throne, her expression unreadable as she observed them from a distance. When the room had mostly cleared, Zara turned to Jake, her eyes softening as she looked up at him. "Whatever happens next," she said quietly, "we face it together." Jake smiled, the weight of the past days lifting just a little as he reached out to take her hand. "Together," he agreed. As they left the chamber, the future still uncertain, but now filled with possibility, Jake couldn't help but feel that for the first time since he had crash-landed on this alien world, he was no longer just an outsider. He had found something far more valuable than survival. He had found a place in Zara's heart, and together they would shape the future of two worlds. And as they walked into the twilight, hand in hand, Jake knew that whatever storms lay ahead, they would weather them together.